Hello, my name is Chris. I am 28 years old and I am the self-published author of the Vengeance series on Amazon and honestly wherever else it's published. I can't really keep up. For those of you who don't know, Vengeance is a supernatural thriller type mystery anime action type story that's spanning a few books right now. The direct sequel to Vengeance Children of Faust is actually coming out January 29th, 2022. And the entire story I have been writing since 2012. And I actually used a short story version of this, like the original, like 42-page short story. I used that to make up high school credits in order to graduate. So if I didn't start writing this, I wouldn't have graduated. So for this little mini podcast thing, whatever you want to call it, I'm not used to doing these by myself, by the way. I do a different podcast called the Nihility Podcast, which usually features my brother and a guest. And that's always focused on vulgar humor and gaming and life stuff. But doing this by myself, I kind of wanted to answer some questions that I found on BookFox called 50 Good Questions to Ask an Author. And I'm not going to answer all of them. I'm going to kind of go through the list and answer ones that obviously I find personally relevant. So, starting off easy, what is the first book that made me cry? The first thing that comes to my mind is probably my favorite book of all time, which isn't anything crazy. It's Things Not Seen by Andrew Clemens. Or Clements? I always forget if Clements has a T in it or not. It's one of those things that I just constantly flip in my head. Yeah, I haven't read that book in so long. I need to reread it again. I have my original copy. Bobby Phillips, I believe, was the main character's name. It was Bobby something. I remember just getting to the end of that book. Every single time I get to the end, I'm always in tears, and I don't know why. I relate to the characters so much, and I just find such like a deep connection with them. With his friend Alicia Van Dorn. Just absolutely love the story. I don't know what it is. It was one of like the first books that I really got into outside of, kids stories like Dragon Slayer's Academy and stuff like that. I really resonated with that. So I think I could cry at that. Even now, I haven't read it in over 10 years. I could definitely still cry by the end of it. Does writing energize or exhaust you? I think that depends on what stage I'm at with the writing. For me personally, I get most energized when I'm in that like zone of I'm just getting stuff down on the page, I'm just working on the blueprint. I'm just kind of clattering away at the keyboard, not worrying too much about how the spelling is, a sentence structure. That's the energized part of it. You're on a tear. You're furiously typing. The exhausting part of it is the moreover tedious when I'm going through and doing final edits and I'm just kind of finding synonyms for some words, finding repetitious words, fixing all the little habitual mistypings that I do, just all that slogging. The only thing I can imagine comparing it to is the mother and father in Tim Burton's Coraline and how they're just like soddenly typing away, just so bleak. And that's how it feels most times going through doing that harsh final editing phase. Does a big ego help or hurt writers? I think a big ego definitely, it hurts and helps in many ways. I think it hurts the writing process and the ability to accept criticism. If you have a big ego, I feel like you're going to overlook tropes in writing, and I think you're probably going to be overlooking bad sentence or paragraph structure. Or even just bad dialogue at that point. You're going to overlook the bad stuff because if you have a big ego, you're going to be thinking yourself as, do no wrong. But then again, the big ego could really help because with a big ego, I feel comes a sense of confidence and more of an ability to actually put yourself out there. I suffer personally from being too shy and finding it difficult to impose my writing on others because I feel like I am being forceful, even if I'm just asking simply, hey, do you like to read? Well, I wrote some books. Are you interested in this? Even just having that conversation, I will almost never bring it up because I feel like I'm imposing on their lives. And I feel like I'm almost guilting them. And that's a complex in and of myself. But I don't have an ego, and I definitely don't have the confidence for that. So I feel like having a big ego helps with that aspect of it, like the marketing yourself. But then again, could be a double-edged sword because then you might be misleading people into thinking that you wrote, just something incredible, but when in fact it's average. So it helps and hurts. I feel like it hurts more than anything though. What is your writing kryptonite? Oh man, the first thing that comes to my head is just my body. Just the physical pain I get from sitting in one position for too long. I'm a very skinny person, so when I'm sitting in my chair for an extended period of time, I fidget. I'm never comfortable for very long because my joints hurt, my back starts to hurt, my neck gets a kink in it, or I get too distracted because of ADHD, and I find ways to postpone writing and to go distract myself by checking on the bunnies, my pet rabbits, or something like that. My writing kryptonite is definitely just getting myself distracted and justifying the distractions somehow, and then making them go longer and just perpetuating them. And the physical aspect of sitting in one spot and not being able to fidget around or mess with my phone or do something because I feel like I'm distracting myself. So, did you ever consider writing under a pseudonym? Yes, I have, mostly because I feel like my last name, Ulm, is not discoverable. It's weird to say because it's German, and I don't think Chris Ulm is a very good writer's name. I'm not quite sure what I would go with, whether or not it would be Christopher Ulm by my full name, or if it would be Christopher E. Ulm based on E from my middle name, or if I would just omit my actual birth name altogether and assign it Linkin or something like that based on my online alias. I would have to take suggestions for a pseudonym because I'm not usually good at thinking of these things on my own, mostly because I'm lazy and I don't give it much thought outside of the first phase of thinking. Do you try to be more original or deliver readers what they want? I try to be as original as I can while drawing inspirations from the things that I personally love and resonate with, but I think what makes my characters and scenarios more original is a lot of times the characters are all a piece of me, so they're all, as humbly as I could say, complex in their own way without divulging too deeply into their personality. So you can tell, I feel, based on the way I describe how a character moves, holds themselves, their inflections when they speak, and just their reactions to any random scenario. Like if I put one character in a situation, I could come up with exactly their response to this thing based on just their character alone without having to think too much about how would this character react. Like it writes themselves. So I feel like they're original in the aspect that they've taken on a life of their own outside of me, because they're a piece of me and they've kind of grown into that, and the scenarios are they're just an amalgamation of inspirations from media that I consume. I'm not ripping off anything that I like, but they definitely help stir the creative juices by watching the things that inspire the genre. And I'm not one to do what people want. I'm not one to sit there and say, oh, I think it would be better if this happened. And I go, well, that's not what I wrote. So, unless there's a legitimate reason behind it where I can see it from a different perspective and think, yeah, you know what, maybe I could adjust this or whatnot. But personally, I do what I do. I'm not a people pleaser when it comes to the things I create. I create what I like, and if you don't like it, that's fine. That's your prerogative, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. What other authors are you friends with, and how do they help you? How do they help you become a better writer? I'm actually not friends with many authors. I did know an author named Dan Waltz in Michigan, I believe. Swartz Creek, Michigan, I think it was. And I actually met him at my ex-girlfriend's church gathering Christmas event, and I brought they were doing like a Santa reading stories kind of thing, and I volunteered to bring some of my film lighting equipment so the guy who was filming the whole thing could have better lighting than what he had for like his iPad. And it turns out that the guy I was loaning the equipment to, Dan Waltz, was an author of a book called was it Ash Like a Glove, I think. I don't quite remember, but he wrote a book, and we got to talking about how I was writing books, and our relationship didn't go very far outside of a handful of conversations after that event. And I did purchase his Kindle book, but I hadn't gotten around to reading it because I'm just too busy writing my own stuff that I never take the time to do a lot of reading. I'm trying to do better about that now. I've actually, in the first time in a long time, I finished reading a book. So yeah, I know of one author personally, but I don't think I'm friends even online with any other authors. So that it also makes that kind of hard because I have a lot of writing challenges that I can't really express with anybody in my personal circle. That's kind of difficult. Do you want each book to stand on its own, or are you trying to build a body of work with connections between each book? Okay, my entire series is an expansive universe that all revolve around this one integral plot. So there are the only books that could stand on their own would be maybe the prequel and then book number 1 in the series. So book number 1, Vengeance, Children of Faust, could be read on its own, and you could leave it at that, and you could go to the sequel that's coming out, or you could just leave it at book 1 and just kind of leave the mystery of the ending, just like the cliffhanger of the ending, and kind of write your own ending if you want. With whatever lingering questions you have, you could always leave it as a standalone. That's fine. But I do think you might be able to read the prequel story, Transgression, on its own. But I think it's hard because even though it's a prequel, it's meant to be read after the first one because it gives context to a lot of the mystery in the first book. So if you read the prequel first, you would almost ruin the first third of the book's mystery. You would definitely ruin the first third of the book's mystery. So no, none of my books could really be read on their own because they all reference certain things. Characters kind of slip in and out of the mythos, and you have no reference for them, so you would just be so confused. You probably could, but you'd have to get the mainline story in order to have any semblance of what the heck was going on. How did publishing your first book change your process of writing? Publishing my first book was through a company called Ex Libris, and they screwed me over, so it definitely changed my process of marketing and copyright. But as far as how it changed my process of writing, I guess it would be to be more careful and to be absolutely sure before making things available in print. I'm very cautious now, and I try not to let anything be available on paperback until it's polished to the best of my ability, because I can't afford to have professional editors go through, and I put that disclaimer at the beginning of the books. But it's a difficult thing. What was an early experience where you learned that language had power? I would say probably back in middle school, roughly, when I was that guy who people would come to for advice. I was, due to extensive trauma, I was more emotionally mature and had a different perspective than 99% of the people, 92% of the people that I went to school with. So whenever they had a type of problem, they knew that they could come to me and I would speak to them very analytically about their issue and most of the time be unbiased. So like they would bring an issue about a boy or a girl and I would basically re-explain what they told me in a different way. I would mirror it back to them in a different way so they could hear themselves and get a better understanding of what they were trying to work out within themselves. And then I would play devil's advocate for both sides and just give that perspective based on my own opinion, views, and experiences. So when I was going around and giving people this quote-unquote life advice, given it was middle school, I understood that there was a certain chemistry to a sentence and the emotion behind those words. And there's a weight behind what I was saying, given my expression and given my posture and just how they absorbed what I was saying. You could tell in just their mannerisms, if they were invested, if they were understanding, if they were confused, like the way you word everything. You could say the same thing in two different ways or change one or two words and have a completely different take on it. I could tell you one specific thing and you would get a take on that, right? And then I could tell you the same thing, but change around a couple words, change around a couple tenses, maybe even just change the inflection in my voice, and you might get a completely different take from it. What does literary success look like to you? To me, the bar is set very low. So if I walked into a Walmart, if I walked into a Meijer, or any local bookstore that I didn't personally seek out, and I saw my work on the shelf, that right there would elate me. If I walked into Walmart and I saw my book on the shelf, if I didn't purposely go and put my book on that shelf, if I went to a bookstore or a library and my book was there and I didn't contact them to get my book there, that's incredible. getting, any number of reviews on any site, having somebody send you a message on whatever social media that represents your writing personality or whatever have you, getting a personal message of somebody like going out of their way to tell you that they like your books or that they love your characters or that they love the scene, or having somebody ask you questions because they want to know more about a character, the lore, what happened with this, what happened with that, why did you do this, why did you do that. I think that is success to me, not monetary value, but how many people you're able to entice, reach out and touch, and have them feel so strongly about your work and to ignite the desire to reach out to you. I think that's what literary success is to me. What's the best way to market your books? I don't know. I can barely sell any. The way that I do it is mostly local, and I actually print out business cards with QR codes that lead to the Amazon link, and I sprinkle those out everywhere. I actually used to go onto Omegle text chat, and I would search for interest under books and anime, and I'd find people on there and then say, hey, I'll give you a free copy of my book if you want it. So I'm not the best person to ask about marketing because I'm not good with marketing myself. And I also give my stuff away for free. So I'm not the best. What's the most difficult thing about writing characters from the opposite sex? Now, I'm male, and the main character in my story is female. But I think I personally, in my life, I am a little bit feminine in my mannerisms and a lot of times in my views and my fashion. But that doesn't equate to personality because I don't have a feminine personality, I don't think. So writing a female character is challenging because you almost feel dirty when you write certain scenes, especially given the character's age, because she's a middle school girl, but she's a tomboy. So she has a lot of, she kind of skirts that gray line of being guyish, but also still a girl. So I think the most difficult thing when it comes to that is, even though I understand the emotions, there's a certain depth to the opposite gender's emotions that you just can't quite scratch. So you can only do so well with it. But then again, however you write it is the character, and people can't exactly argue that. Just because the character's a female doesn't mean that they are restricted to a certain set of emotions and a certain boundary of reactions to scenarios, So I think it comes down to trivial things like, when the character is stripping down to get in the shower, you don't make it overtly sexual for a multitude of reasons. But then if the characters say there's a scene in the sequel where a female character has bruised ribs and it's being written from a first person perspective. So it's like, how do I write a girl lifting her breast slightly to see the bruises on the ribs without it coming off as, oh, a guy clearly wrote this, without lingering on it too long, without making it weird. So you just write it very simply. I lifted my breast slightly to get a better view of the yada, yada, yada. I think writing stuff like that is kind of weird. If they're getting changed, I changed. Do I write underwear or do I write panties? Like, how do I write this? I think it's those things that really kind of trip me up and make me question and even ask. In the past, I've asked my female friends, hey, is this good if I write it like that? And they go, yeah, that's fine. What are you talking about? I go, okay, cool. I'm overthinking it. So what did you edit out of this book? Now I'm going to use the first book in the series, Children of Faust. And there's a lot of stuff I edited out of the book. I hate that word. It's my least favorite word, edited. Namely, there was and now trigger warning, by the way, so skip ahead like 30-40 seconds if you're sensitive to a multitude of things. There was an attempted suicide scene that I wrote out where a character swallowed a lot of types of pills, but the thing is, given the context of the parasitic demon that's inside of them, they could not die from it. So it was really an attempt in vain, but a character that discovered the main character doing this is unaware of the parasitic demon, so they're treating it obviously like, spit those out, what are you doing? So I cut that out. There was a kissing scene that I cut out because it just kind of these things didn't really fit with the pacing. Now I do reference in the future of a suicide attempt that took place in the shadows of book 1 that we don't really get to experience, but Yeah, it's stuff like that is kind of hard because I don't shy away from gore, from language, from violence. I mean, hell, I relish in it. I like to show the gritty aspect of these things, just ground you in that realism, and really kind of put the characters through the grinder. Not out of any kind of like pleasureful, sadistic way, but again, I like to try to stick to, in this scenario, given the powers and the world that these characters are in, this is how that would go, and this would be the experience. I don't want the characters to say dang instead of damn it. I don't want characters to say freak instead of fuck, like these characters would be saying fuck, that fucking hurts, and I write that out. So I don't cut out a lot of stuff. Mostly it's me being overly descriptive at times. That's the biggest thing that I cut out. How do you select the names of your characters? Actually, most of the time, it's literally the first thing that comes to my head, and if I think it fits, then I put it in there. The main character of my story is named Kimberly Ann Avery, and the name Avery came from nowhere. I just thought it fit well with the first half of the name, Kimberly Ann, and then Avery popped in my head. Maybe it was inspired by James Avery. From Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I don't think so, but that's the only Avery I think I know of. So maybe subconsciously it just kind of sat in there, but I don't usually go searching for names, especially when I'm naming demonic characters. It's usually I look at the character in my head, how I imagine them, and what their personality is, and I assign them a name based on that. And I don't usually give it too much thought, but that by doing that is also how most characters end up with multiple names or nicknames that they go by. So Kim or Kimberly Ann Avery goes by Kim or Kimmy or even Kiki. So every character has a multitude of names that they go by, and I think that might be because of indecision or just given nicknames. The secondary main character in the first book is named Tansuki Hikono. And because she's a Japanese American character, and the name Tansu, which is, Tansuki shortened, doesn't have any significance. In fact, she originally was a Caucasian girl named Stephanie, and that just because that was extremely early on, that was like, it's only in my head type of thing. And I looked it up later, and I think I found out that Tansu or Tansuki translates in Japanese loosely to chest, like a crate or whatever have you. And then I kind of came up with, my mother named me Tansu because I was the hope chest that she could put all of her love into. But then you have demon characters that I give a name and then they get their true name later on, like a character whose name is Lust. I named her Lust because I don't know. It was just what came to my head. And then later on, I reassigned her the name Leomik, but she goes by the nickname Lust. So it's the naming for characters is, as I said, usually like the first thing that pops into my head. And if it fits, cool. What was the hardest scene to write? I can't really talk about it because of spoilers, but anytime that the main character is just suffering and hopeless because it stems from a very personal pit of loathing and drowning that I have lived through and continue to live through. So when I'm writing the character in that scenario, I'm almost writing myself in that scenario, and I have to relive a lot of those emotions. So, do you hide any secrets in your books that only a few people will find? I used to put references in my book. I think I referenced Achievement Hunter, which is a YouTube channel. There was a Minecraft episode that they did where one of the commentators, Ray, made a joke saying "no way in, no way out, no way in, no way out," and I put in the book somewhere "no way in, no way out," and even though it's a nothing line, and technically not even true because there has to be a way in, which means there's a way out. And it was just a reference to that, but I removed that line later on. There's a lot of references like that, but I think mostly it's the foreshadowing stuff that when you go through on a second read, you'll notice like, oh, the needle and the spool were in this drawer that we saw 5 chapters before it was relevant, or, oh, it makes more sense why okay, now I understand why there was this clattering down in the basement, or why this weird kid was in the hall. Now I know who that is and what was going on with that, and you don't learn that till book 2, So it's mostly for people who are reading it through for a second time or a third time that they'll notice the little foreshadowing and like the little details. What is your favorite childhood book? The Hungry Caterpillar. Next question. No, honestly, I think I say probably Dragon Slayer's Academy was my favorite book series as a little kid. Does your family support your career as a writer? I mean, it's not a career. It's a side hobby that I'm working towards making something. And my family supports it, but no one in my family are readers. So getting them to actually read and appreciate my work is literally impossible. I had to actually sit down and read the books to some of my family members to get them to actually get the story. So they support it, but they don't engage with it because it's just not their thing. How long on average does it take you to write a book? If I'm writing a main book in the series, I mean, the first book took me 10 years to fully, conceptualize and complete to where it is now. And that was me only working on it randomly. I wouldn't sit down and dedicate 2 or 3 hours a day to writing. It was, once a week I might do some writing, but it's always in my head, but I won't actually sit down to do the writing outside of a handful of times in a month. And then this week I had a frenzy of 5 days where I was doing writing, and then I'll have 3 weeks of no writing. So, and on top of that, I would get distracted because I would also do drawings for the book. I would do character concepts, and then I would make music for like an ambient soundtrack for the book. So there was many things that were kind of sprouting from it, like roots from a tree, just kind of expanding that I was working on. So it was never just me fully working on the book. So book 1 took me the longest at about 8 to 10 years. Book 2 actually has only taken me about 1.5 years, but conceptually, book 2 has existed for 5 years, and it existed as a blueprint and event list for the first 3.5 years. I only started writing it fully sometime last year at the beginning of 2021 or the end of 2020. And like I said, it's releasing January 29th, 2022. But along the way, I have written other stories in the universe, so the Origins series, usually I can bust those out. If I really sat down and did it, I could bust out an Origins mini, short story, 140 pages, or 140 pages. I could bust that out in 4 to 5 months. But something like Transgression, that took me about 1 year, 1.5 years. So mainstay books, at least 1 year, minimum 3 years, maximum 10 years, roughly is what it takes me, because I just do too much at once. I overwhelm myself, and I work on too many projects, so I never just sit down and write. Also, there's no monetary inspiration. There's nothing to give me that drive outside of my own satisfaction of creating it. If it was my job, I could easily write a book in a much shorter time. But since it's only a hobby, it's difficult to set aside the time when you feel like it's kind of wasted. What are common traps for aspiring writers? Now, this is kind of a double-edged thing again. I'd say writing fan fiction is kind of a trap because there's a mass appeal to writing fan fiction. You already have a fully developed character in most instances that you're just putting into different scenarios and spinning your own fiction on them, whether it's, supernatural Destiel fan fiction, or whether it's you just writing a side story for Naruto to go on with his companions. I feel that's a good way to start and to kind of get the idea of what it means to be a writer, but it's almost like tracing paper. You're leaning on somebody else's work to then branch off into your own thing, but the basic, like the foundation of it, is still somebody else's work. So I think that can lead you down a path of bad habits when it comes to writing. I can't, for example, if you're writing your own story after having written fan fiction, you will still find yourself kind of tethered to the characters that you were so engaged with that you felt the need to write fan fiction about, and you'll kind of be leaning on that for, I wouldn't even say inspiration, but almost plagiarism in a way. I'm not saying that that's how it always works, but again, it's kind of like tracing paper. You need to write from personal experience. Write a story based around something that happened to you because you experienced it. So when I first started writing as a very little kid, and this wasn't me writing to be a writer, I was doing school projects. So I was writing for an English class or something like that. And I wrote stories based around events that happened in my life. Us going up against a black bear at the end of my driveway, us trying to recover our dog that ran away, stuff like that. And it really kind of flexes your creativity when you're trying to remember what happened, but also embellish what happened to make it fun to read and engaging. You sprinkle in some new dialogue here and there. You add some new mannerisms that didn't maybe quite exist or aren't quite representative of the person, but that's what makes it fiction. So when you're adapting from another medium, it feels kind of lazy. I don't know. I just think it's a bad habit to get into. But again, if that's what you do, more power to you. The last question we're going to answer is, what is the most unethical practice in the publishing industry? This is kind of, it sucks because there's so many false companies and real companies that prey on writers. I'd even argue to say 88% of the companies that reach out to you about your writing and your works are just trying to scam you. And that's what I find very difficult, is I get, within the span of a month, I probably get 8 emails asking me to, let's turn it into a TV show. Let's make a movie out of it. How about you publish under us? We'll give you $14,000 up front. All these things that look extremely credible and would easily fool somebody who has never seen this before. And heck, even still fools me now. I sometimes respond to them saying, hey, I don't quite believe you. How do I even know this is real, kind of thing? And I have to go to the Authors Guild and all these other websites to prove that these are scam companies, because I have been scammed before. So the publishing industry is almost like the music industry in the way that you are just, as a creator, preyed upon as nothing more than a generator of money and profit. And it's disgusting because there's no honesty in it, and it's extremely difficult for you to query out your work and try to find a publishing company because you don't even know which ones are real anymore. And it seems like no matter what research you do, there's always somebody on the Better Business Bureau that's telling you this company's a scam, that company's a scam. So I think it's just the lack of transparency and the absolute infestation of scam companies in the publishing industry. That's I know it's not the publishing industry's fault. The real legitimate companies can't really control that, but it is something that it's a result of this. It's a result of a creative endeavor like this. It's going to happen, and it's very frustrating. Well, that's going to be it. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this little sit-down and Q&A that I hosted. If you guys want to see more content like this, if you have questions yourself that you want to ask me, feel free to go to linkinslegion.com, and it will be in the podcast description somewhere. You can send me an email. Just put in the subject line, author Q&A or anything you want. Just, get my attention with it. And who knows, maybe I'll do some listener feedback. So thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you later, hopefully. Bye-bye.